Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So just a couple of reminders and announcements, inshallah, before we continue. Most of us, I'm assuming, saw the email that went out today, but for those who didn't, just to clarify, so there was a teenage brother who's been coming to the programs every night, and this morning his grandparents tested positive for COVID. His grandparents and his family have not been attending. It's just the young brother by himself who has been coming with some of the other brothers to the programs. So inside the prayer hall, he has been wearing the mask the entire time, and generally in the lobby and the hallway as well, he's been mostly been wearing the mask. But we have reached out to the families of some of the younger brothers that he had been playing with that we think might have been exposed without the mask. So just wanted to, share that with everyone, and just a reminder, please make sure that at all times during the program, you're wearing your mask and it's properly covering your face and your nose. Your mouth and your nose. If your nose is sticking out, the mask is not doing its job. If your mouth is sticking out, the mask is not doing its job. And, that's really the best and the most important mitigation that we have to, inshallah, keep all of us safe, inshallah. There's a children's program that's going on in parallel down the hall. So please make sure that if you have kids under the age of 9, they're either with you or they are participating in the children's program. The Day of Ashura program is going to be on Thursday. So Thursday is the Day of Ashura. We'll send out the email with the details as well, but just for everyone's awareness. So we typically start around 10:30 in the morning. And then that we do the amal for the Day of Ashura with the Ziyarat Ashura, the 100 times recitations, the prayer, and then Zohar prayer. After Zohar prayer, it's usually the Maqtal and the Azadari, and then we have the meal at that time. And then there's the evening program, which will start at the same time, 6:30 as usual, for the Shami Ghariban program. So we'll send the email with all the specific details, but just wanted to share that with those who had been asking. And then, inshallah, without any further ado, I'd like to request our respected guest scholar, Sheikh Razak, to please begin the lecture. Please welcome him with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
For your own marhameen and for the marhameen of all community members and all mu'mineen throughout the world, please recite each surah Fatiha masbuqatan bis salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم صلى على محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين إنه خير ناصر ومعين ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين وحجته على الخلق أجمعين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الناس قد جاءكم الرسول بالحق من ربكم فآمنوا خيرا لكم وإن تكفروا فإن لله ما في السماوات والأرض وكان الله عليما حكيما. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات على محمد وعلى آله. Dear brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Last night we began to talk about this mortal and moral battle that we have, this spiritual conflict that we have in each and every one of us, where we are faced against shaitan, and we talked about the aims and the goals of shaitan. And we also talked about the resources and the allies that he brings to that battle. And we also began talking about some of the resources that we have, that we can bring to bear in this conflict. Inshallah, tonight I'd like to conclude this discussion by mentioning three particular things that Imam Ali focuses on in the rest of this khutbah that we have been going over these past few nights. And the first of those is place and space. Imam Ali, he points to the Kaaba that Allah commanded Nabi Ibrahim to construct. And he says that Allah commanded all Muslims and all people to turn their direction and to orient themselves in their worship of Him towards certain stones and rocks. بأحجار لا تضر ولا تنفع. There are certain rocks and certain stones that don't neither harm nor do they benefit. ولا تبصر ولا تسمع. Nor do they see or hear. Imam Ali says, if Allah wanted to make this place, this sanctuary that He has designated for all humankind, in those spectacular and glamorous ways that we account for and that we maybe would take pride in, then He could have. He could have made the Kaaba and the Masjid al-Haram into a place which dazzled the eyes out of certain beautiful and majestic rocks and certain gems of different colors. But what Allah chose to do is to make His sanctuary and the most sacred place on His earth into certain things that even the very sight of them don't seem spectacular. لا تبصر ولا تسمع فجعلها بيته الحرام الذي جعله للناس قياما. And He made these rocks that you don't think are spectacular and amazing. He made these very things and this very place into something that people take sanctuary in, and they have certain safety and peace within. It's this Masjid al-Haram. Now, don't think about Masjid al-Haram or Mecca today. Today, things have changed quite a bit. But during the time of the Prophet, and even after the Prophet, Mecca was a very small city. And it wasn't very spectacular. There was, of course, the masjid, but there weren't these high-rise buildings and these skyscrapers. And even today, when we think and we look at the Kaaba itself, it still has some semblance of that original construction, just plain stones and rocks. When we think about ourselves and our interactions in this world, we have to think about it in terms of that moral and that spiritual plane, not in terms of certain material or certain physical attributes that they may take on. And so space and place becomes a primary and particular importance when we think about our relationship with God. It becomes important for us to establish certain places within not just the world, but even in our own lives. If we want to engage in this battle, and if we want to survive and if we want to thrive, then we have to set certain places aside for ourselves, just as God has set aside. If we think about, for example, our own daily practice, we should maybe set aside a place where we do salat in our own homes that's dedicated to salat. In fact, we have various recommendations from scholars that when a person is at the end of his life, what's called al-muhtadar, when the angel of death is coming and going, this person is about to meet the angel of death. It's recommended that a person goes to that place in which they remember Allah. That's musalla, that place of prayer that they have constructed for themselves, that they've set aside for themselves. For a mu'min, a person who remembers Allah, it's not just certain words that we do or that we say, certain actions that we have, but certain places that remind us of that relationship that we have with Allah. And those places give a believer a sense of tranquility and peace in the most difficult of times. And so place and space has its own sacredness and its own sanctity. And in particular, we think about, for example, the Day of Judgment. See that in the Quran, one of the witnesses that bears witness and testimony against us is this very earth and what we have done on it. يَوْمَئِذٍ تُحَدِّثُ أَخْبَارَهَا. The day in which this very earth presents all of the things that we have done upon it. Whichever place and whichever space it might be on this earth. The earth bears witness against us or for us if we have done good. When we think about the relationship of this world to the next, sometimes we can think about it as being just two separate worlds. That we live this life and we maybe, do certain things. And then once we die, we go somewhere else. We go someplace else. Maybe it's far away. We can't even imagine what it looks like. But in fact, when we look in ahadith, we see that that other place is not some distant and far off land. It's the very reality that we have lived on this earth. Our actions, it is said in various ahadith and teachings of Islam, our actions themselves present their true selves to us on the Day of Judgment. Well, what would that mean? That we have done certain things in this world, and we only see the superficial aspect of those things. We only see the superficial aspect of the places that we occupy or the things that we say. There is a deeper reality to this very world that is presented to us on the Day of Judgment. Now, there are times in this world and our lives in this world that Allah as well removes that veil from our eyes. But ultimately, if we want full access to the reality and the depth of our actions and, of course, ultimately of ourselves, then that will come in the Day of Judgment. Who we are and who we have become. And so Amir al-Mu'mineen Imam Ali here, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He pays particular attention to space and place. Another thing that Amir al-Mu'mineen focuses on are the people that we surround ourselves. Mentioned last night that one of the tactics of shaitan is to infiltrate the people around us, those external forces, those allies of shaitan, not just within ourselves, but external to us. Al-Jamiha, those people who are disobedient towards God. At-Tama'iyyat minkum, those who have desires and who are seeking those desires throughout their lives. Not only do those people pull you away from your ultimate goal, but as well they take you towards that arrogance and that vanity that shaitan is calling us towards. So people as well, place and then people. Now this is a particularly important point that the Ahlul Bayt talk about. How and what is our interaction and our relationship with the people that surround us? When we look at the hadith of the Ahlul Bayt, in particular when we see the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad al-Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet describes our relationship with other people, whether it is with our companions and those who are, say, not necessarily subservient to us, or those people who are below us and that maybe we have some sort of authority towards. He talks about it, and the Ahlul Bayt in general talk about it in terms of responsibilities. The Prophet says, "Kullukum ra' wa kullukum mas'ul." Each one of you has an authority and is in a position of power, and each one of you is responsible towards that power. So if we kind of imagine ourselves, a lot of us, in fact, all of us, will have some people who are below us. Maybe some people we command, maybe some people who follow us as community leaders, as people within our own families, maybe we're parents, maybe we're older brothers. And even at the highest level of society, those people who lead and who rule society, in fact, the primary example that the Prophet gives is of an imam, person who leads. He says, "Kullukum ra'," each one of you has some authority, but your interaction with those people who are under you and who follow you should not be in terms of that power and that authority you have over them. Your interaction with them should be in terms of that mas'uliyah, that responsibility, that accountability that you are going to face. وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ. Each one of you is going to be asked about what were those, how did you fulfill those responsibilities? How did you uphold those rights of those who served under you or who followed you? And this is something, again, that each one of us has to deal with. How did we interact with, say, our children, or say those, if we are community leaders, how did we interact with those people who are part of our community? The primary view that we have, we're trying to adjust our view and orient our view according to the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. The primary view that we have towards others is how I can serve. In another hadith of the Prophet, he says, "Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Al-khalqu kulluhum iyalullah." All of creation. And in fact, the Prophet doesn't even specify it to people. He says, all of creation. All of creation is dependence of Allah. They're, just like how we might have dependence for ourselves and we might sort of mark them off in our tax returns. Whoever we are responsible for, all of these beings are dependents and responsibilities of Allah. وَأَحَبُّهُمْ إِلَى اللَّهِ أَنْفَعُهُمْ إِلَى عِيَالِهِ. The most beloved of people towards Allah is the person who is most beneficial towards those people who are dependent upon Allah. And so we think about ourselves not only in terms of our responsibility towards other creatures and other human beings and other people that surround us, but in terms of how much we can benefit them. So we think about, for example, we try to surround ourselves with people who can support us and aid us upon this path. He said our ultimate goal is that spiritual and moral conflict that we have. And so we have to surround ourselves with people who can support us on that path. We think about, for example, when we're beginning to start a family. A lot of times these days, people will say, before they want to start a family, they say, okay, I have to have these things in order. I have to, for example, have my finances in order. I have to be able to make some money and so on, before they're willing to start a family. Or for example, some others might say, I have to work on myself to a certain point, to a certain extent, before I'm ready to get married. Well, if we think about our families, and if we think about those people that we are trying to gather around ourselves in terms of a process, in terms of a path that we are trying to take, in terms of this conflict, then there's no specific point in which now I'm ready. Now I'm ready to create a family. Now I'm ready to get married. Now I'm ready to resolve the conflicts that I have with those around me. Right? We're all trying to have certain allies with each other and for ourselves. And so if it's in terms of this process, if we think about ourselves and our lives, in terms of the process in which we take to reach our ultimate goal, then you think about, well, if I want to get married, then am I connected to a family or a network of people who can support me in terms of my finances? Now, we talk about that personal growth that a lot of times we give a lot of importance to. That personal growth, then, if we have those family networks, if we have that community support, then those personal issues, then they will get resolved along that process and as we go on that path. We think about how the Prophet dealt with his community. There's many different examples that we can give of how compassionate and kind the Prophet was. One example in particular that comes to mind is the way that the Prophet would pray. It's said that Prophet Muhammad al-Mustafa sallallahu alaihi Muhammad al-Muhammad النبي كان أخف الناس بالصلاة تماما or في تمام. النبي كان أخف الناس صلاة في تمام. The Prophet was the lightest and the least difficult of people when it comes to salat. What does this mean? Whenever the Prophet would engage in, say, Jama'at prayer, when we think about prayer, of course, it's the most essential part of our religion. And so giving importance to prayer then becomes the most essential part of our faith. Right? It becomes the most important thing that we can give importance to. And so when we think about how the Prophet interacted with prayer, this becomes a view towards what we saw, how we can understand the Prophet's priorities. And it's said that the Prophet was the lightest and the easiest person in prayer. Well, what this means is when there was a congregational prayer, when people would gather, say, in the masjid, the Prophet would look at, well, what is the congregation like? And he would try to adjust his prayer, or he would try to make his prayer such a way that that doesn't become a burden for those who would follow him. So maybe he would reduce say, the number of adhkar, the number of mustahabat that he would commit in his prayer. When we think about our own lives, we said, setting aside a place in our house for our prayer. Maybe setting aside a time that we can commit that prayer with, say, our families. And then not making that prayer so difficult that, you do it once and then never again. Nobody ever wants to do this jama'at ever again. Right? You make it in such a way that you kind of rush if you need to. If you have, say, younger children, you kind of make it in a way that they come back. We talk about prayer. This last point that Amir al-Mu'mineen Imam Ali makes in this khutbah is talking about our own actions. We talked about the place in which we have this fight, this combat shaitan and ourselves. Talked about our allies in this conflict, and we talk about our actions. Amir al-Mu'mineen describes the wajibat that Islam has ordained for us in terms of this process of trying to debase ourselves in the face of Allah. There are various ways we can think about the wajibat. One way, for example, is to simply think of them as actions that we have to do, that we're required to do by God. Another way to think about them is resources along this process of trying to realize our relationship with Allah. And so Amir al-Mu'mineen says, تَعْفِيرُ عِتَاقِ الْوُجُوهِ. Salat, God has commanded it so that we can debase ourselves. Think about the part of your body that you pay the most attention to and that you care the most about, your face. And yet God commands you to place your face upon the earth and clay. And in fact, if we think about the mustahabat, it's recommended not only for us, it's required, in fact, for us to place our forehead on the ground, whatever natural material there is, but even our nose, the most prominent places of our face, right? So we connect ourselves and we press ourselves against the earth, that most important part of our body. تَعْفِيرُ عِتَاقِ الْوُجُوهِ بِالتُّرَابِ تَوَاضُعًا, to symbolize our utter need in Allah. وَالْتِسَاقُ كَرَائِمِ الْجَوَارِحِ بِالْأَرْضِ تَصَاغُرًا, and we press our body, we adhere our body to the ground, tasaguran, so that we can make ourselves lowly in the face of Allah. And we do all of these things. Inshallah, we go through and we check all of these boxes, and we, for example, surround ourselves with the best of people, and we make the places that we have, into the most sacred of places. But then in the end of the day, when we have done all of this, at the end of the day, we realize that all of these efforts, all of these actions, a lot of us do this, all of these efforts and all of these actions, all of these people who surround us, one day they will separate themselves. One day, maybe they'll even disobey us or disobey God. Maybe they'll even start to have a dislike towards us and they will separate themselves. One day, maybe we even realize, if we reflect, that all of our actions come to nothing, whether it's because of our intentions or the actions themselves, our efforts in the face of God. And that's when we realize, it's that crucial moment when we think about bala, the way the Quran talks about bala, and the meaning of the word bala is not some calamity that befalls us. But in fact, bala is defined in the Quran and used in the Quran in terms of a test. It's those crucial moments in our lives when God takes away all of those things that we have calculated, that we realize. The words of Amir al-Mu'mineen in Dua Kumail, says, Ya Sari' al-Rida, Ighfir liman la yamliku illa du'a. We realize after all of this effort that we have to turn towards Allah, and we have nothing in the face of Allah. Ighfir liman la yamliku illa du'a. Oh Allah, oh He who is the quickest in being content with the most meager of our actions, be forgiving and be merciful towards the person who has nothing except for dua. Irham man ra'su malihi ar-raja. Have mercy and compassion on the person who has no wealth and possession in this world except for hope in you. وَسِلَاحُهُ الْبُكَاءُ. We talk about those resources and those weapons that we use. سِلَاحُهُ الْبُكَاءُ. The ultimate weapon and the ultimate resource we have is tears in the face of Allah. When we face Allah, tears are what melt the heart. When we think about, well, what are those moments in which we cry? What is the function of crying? This school of the Ahlul Bayt is known as those people among the Muslims, or in general, as those people who are known as being those who cry and shed tears. You cry for something that you love, or you cry for something that you need, right? A child cries because something that he loves is taken away from him. Or we cry as adults because someone we love, we have lost. And this process of crying is a process in which we start to open our hearts that maybe throughout our lives, maybe throughout our day have become hardened. And in fact, one of the most difficult of trials that a human being can go through is what's called qasawatul qalb. In the Quran, Allah talks about those people who are punished through having these hardened hearts. Whatever tragedy that they think about, whatever tragedy that they face, no emotion comes, no tears come. Whether it's in their own lives or in someone else's, they can't feel, and their hearts are hardened. So if you think about the function of crying, we think about it in terms of opening ourselves up to that thing that we love. And each and every human being ultimately has a love of the origin of their very existence. That being who can support them through times of difficulty and need. It is said that on the day of Ashura, Imam Hussein cried out loud in two places. Two moments during the day of Ashura, Imam Hussein cried out loud. Last night, we talked about the death of his son, Ali Akbar. There was another moment that Imam Hussein is said in the maktab. He shed tears and he wailed out loud. It is that moment that Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas came to the Imam. He saw that all of the companions of the Imam had given their lives. It's the final moment of the day of Karbala. It's the night of Tasu'ah. There's not really much need for any more talking. It's that moment that Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas saw that not only the companions of the Imam, the Ashab of the Imam, but even all of the Banu Hashim had given their lives. Ali Akbar, Qasim, Aoun and Muhammad, they had all been killed. That Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas comes to the Imam and he asks for permission. Imam Hussein turns to Abu al-Fadl. He turns to Abbas and he says, "Oh Abbas, if you go, who will bear my standard? Who will be my flag bearer for my army, oh Abbas, if you go?" Maybe Abbas turns around He looks from left to right, and he maybe thinks in his mind and in his heart, oh, Imam Hussein, what army am I holding the standard for? Your army has been killed, and there is no one left. But Abbas, because he was a loyal fighter, he doesn't say this. What Abbas says is, oh, Imam, it's difficult for me to bear these enemy soldiers taunt you like this. It's difficult for me to stand here and see them smile. Oh, Imam Hussein, it's difficult for me to stand here and see you all alone. Can I as well sacrifice myself for you? Imam Hussein says, oh, Abbas, yes, you can go and sacrifice yourself, but oh, Abbas, do you hear those cries? Oh, Abbas, do you hear the cries of the children? Oh, Abbas, before you go out into battle, can you bring some water for these children? They're thirsty and they can't bear it any longer. So Abbas prepares himself and he gets on his steed and he goes towards the river. And it is said that those enemy soldiers tried to surround Abbas and they tried to stop his way. But Abbas was such a courageous and was such a brave fighter that no one could stand in the way of Abbas. And at the end of the day, this was the son of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali. It's difficult to recount the tale of Hazrat Abbas. And yet when he gets to the river, he enters into the river. And he takes out that pouch. Sometimes when we are in utter need of something, we sometimes out of habit, we might try to fulfill that need. Whether we are hungry or whether we are thirsty, whenever we get to some water, or whenever we get to some food, all of a sudden, maybe out of habit, we try to fulfill that thirst or that hunger. And so it is said that Abbas comes and tries to pick up some water from the river. And then all of a sudden he realizes the children in the camp are thirsty. My Imam Hussein is thirsty. How can I bring myself to take a sip of water in the face of the thirst of Imam Hussein? And so he casts the water down. How can I respond and answer my father and my grandfather if I take a drink before Imam Hussein takes a drink and quenches his thirst? And so Abbas casts down that water and he fills his pouch and he readies himself to return to the tents and bring water to the family of Imam Hussein. We all know what happens. Abbas rides his horse and he turns towards the tent. And it is said that the enemy soldiers once again surround Abbas, but this time they attack him with whatever they have. From whichever direction they could, from on top of trees. They knew that no single person could stand in the way of Abbas. And so it is said that as Abbas is coming down towards the tent, it is said that one person comes from behind a tree and he strikes Abbas. And this entire time, Imam Hussein is watching that standard of Abbas. He sees that at one moment, the standard of Abbas, the flag of Abbas wavers, and then it's set upright. And then it wavers again, and then it's set upright. And then finally, that final moment, that flag falls to the ground. And it's at that moment that Imam Hussein realized there is no more hope for water. There is no more hope for Abbas. Lady Zainab and this entire tent and the entire camp of Imam Hussein is witnessing this. At one moment, the enemy soldiers come and attack Abbas from behind the tree, and they strike him. It is said that as Abbas is coming towards the tent first, they strike him with whatever thing they had in their hands. And it's only at that moment when they have struck off his right arm, Abbas holds the pouch. This is his only mission that he has. He holds his pouch in his left hand. When they strike off his left hand, he holds the pouch by his mouth, with however way he could. It is at that final moment when they finally strike an arrow at the pouch itself that it is said that the hope of Abbas falls away. When they strike him on his head and he falls to the ground, it is said that Abbas calls out to his brother, Wa akha, adrik akha, oh my brother, come and see what has happened to Abbas. It said that Imam Hussein comes on top of the body of Abbas and he flies to his body and he holds him tight and he brings him to his chest. At no moment throughout the day of Ashura did Imam Hussein say these words, but when he sees the body of Abbas, he realized that at this moment his family is going to be taken. His family is going to be pulled in chains throughout the cities. And so Imam Hussein says, قَدْ انْكَسَرَ ظَهْرِي وَقَلَّتْ حِيلَتِي. It is now that my back has been broken. It is now that all of those plans that I have had, all of those plans that I laid, all of those plans have come to nothing. And it is now that the enemy soldiers laugh and smile at me. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون.
عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم اے فوج حسینی کے علم دار کا ماتم اے فوج حسینی کے علم دار کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم جب لاشیں اڑائی تو زینب یہ پکاری جب لاشیں اڑائی تو زینب یہ پکاری تو آگے کرو شے کے طرفدار کا ماتم تو آگے کرو شے کے طرفدار کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم آئے تھے مدینے سے رہے کربلا آئے تھے مدینے سے رہے کربلا اس عاشق شبیر غفار کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم پانی نہ پیا نہر پیشانی کی کٹائے پانی نہ پیا نہر پیشانی کی کٹائے گزاد وفا ساتھ گلزار کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم خیمہ جلوے بڑی کر بیماری خیمہ جلوے بڑی کر بیماری کرنا نہ ملا بالا گلزار کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم وعدہ کیا ایک سر کا باہر کر دیے فکرے وعدہ کیا ایک سر کا باہر کر دیے فکرے سرکار جنا ثابت الدار کا ماتم سرکار جنا ثابت الدار کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم بازو میں رسن بال کھلے شام کا دربار بازو میں رسن بال کھلے شام کا دربار زینب نے کیا رشتہ راما جائے کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم عباس کا ماتم ہے وفادار کا ماتم یا حسین 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 یا حسین.
You take all the children, you take all the women, so why did you leave me here and leave my heart broken? You leave me alone here and leave me with my tears and leave my heart broken and leave my heart broken. I wake up to find you have left, oh Father. My tears drip down and they flow like a river. Please come back, I ask you, but I creature. I've never been away from you ever. I miss your scent and kiss the son of Hagar. And my name is the sweet name of your mother. You've given me this name, and you I do not blame. Your mother, she loved you, and my love is the same. You've given me this name, and you I do not blame. Your mother, she loved you, and my love is the same. Your words I want to hear. You leave me with my tears, and leave my heart broken, and leave my heart broken. You take all the children, you take all the women, so why did you leave me here and leave my heart broken? You leave me alone here, you leave me with my tears, and leave my heart broken, and leave my heart broken. I'm surrounded by night, Father, you are my light. I'm surrounded by night, Father, you are my light. I live in a shadow without hearing your sight. You take all the children, you take all the women, so why do you leave me here and leave my heart broken? You leave me alone here, you leave me with my tears, and leave my heart broken, and leave my heart broken. I long to hold you near, you leave me with my tears, and leave my heart broken, and leave my heart broken. He tells me, oh young one, it's God's decision that you must be left here and live like an orphan. He tells me, oh young one, it's God's decision that you must be left here and leave like an orphan. I tell him I can't bear, you leave me with my tears, and leave my heart broken, and leave my heart broken. You take all the children, you take all the women, so why did you leave me here and leave my heart broken? You leave me alone here, you leave me with my tears, and leave my heart broken, and leave my heart broken. Ya Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein. करते हैं मातम हरम अब्बास का, हो गया मरना सितम अब्बास का, करते हैं मातम हरम अब्बास का, हो गया मरना सितम अब्बास का, आता है जख्मी अलम अब्बास का, हो गया मरना सितम अब्बास का, करते हैं मातम हरम अब्बास का, हो गया मरना सितम अब्बास का, हाय लबे नहर हुआ क्या रज़ा, तीर लगा मुश्किल सकीना पे जा, आ गया होठों पे दम अब्बास का, हो गया दम अब्बास का, करते हैं मातम हरम अब्बास का, हो गया मरना सितम अब्बास का, कहते हैं रो रो के ये अहले हरम, जाओ हशम सब्र रज़ा ओ करम, किस तरह भूलेंगे हम अब्बास का, हो गया मरना सितम अब्बास का, करते हैं मातम हरम अब्बास का, हो गया मरना सितम अब्बास का, लेके शहंशाह वफा से हया, झूमने कदमों को बड़ी खुद फुरात, देख के जाओ हशम अब्बास का, हो गया मरना सितम अब्बास का,
ہے ماتم حرم عباس کا، ہو گیا مرنا ستم عباس کا. شاہ کے غمخوار پہ ہر ایک پل، شہ کے عزادار پہ ہر ایک پل، رہتا ہے اب بھی کرم عباس کا. ہو گیا مرنا ستم عباس کا، کل ہے ماتم حرم عباس کا، ہو گیا مرنا ستم عباس کا. پھر میرے مولا سے نہ سنبھلا علم، پانی بہا ہو گیا ٹھنڈا علم، مشق میں شاید تھا دم عباس کا. ہو گیا مرنا ستم عباس کا، کرتے ہیں ماتم حرم عباس کا، ہو گیا مرنا ستم عباس کا. مشق سکینہ تو وہیں رک گئی، شاہ مدینہ کی کمر جھک گئی، جب ہوا بازو قلم عباس کا. ہو گیا مرنا ستم عباس کا، کرتے ہیں ماتم حرم عباس کا، ہو گیا مرنا ستم عباس کا. اب کہاں بجھ پائے گی دکھیا کی پیاس، ٹوٹ گئی بالی سکینہ کی آس، ہو گیا بازو قلم عباس کا. ہو گیا مرنا ستم عباس کا، کرتے ہیں ماتم حرم عباس کا، ہو گیا مرنا ستم عباس کا. اشک لہو رو دیا چرخے گوہر، رو دیا بے ساختہ شاہ زمن، دیکھ کے چھلنی علم عباس کا. ہو گیا مرنا ستم عباس کا، کرتے ہیں ماتم حرم عباس کا، ہو گیا مرنا ستم عباس کا. نیز پہ اسکاری قرآن کے ساتھ، دائیں میں غمخوار بھی یزدا کے ساتھ، کرتا ہے نوحہ رقم عباس کا. ہو گیا مرنا ستم عباس کا، کرتے ہیں ماتم حرم عباس کا، ہو گیا مرنا ستم عباس کا. کیا حسین دل سینے میں جب تک ہو بھولے گا نہ غم تیرا، دیکھ میرے غازی اونچا ہے علم تیرا، آگے اونچا ہے علم تیرا. زینب کی دعا بن کر ایک وقت وہ آئے گا، زینب کی دعا بن کر ایک وقت وہ آئے گا، ہر گھر پہ سجا ہوگا عباس علم تیرا. دل سینے میں جب تک ہے بھولے گا نہ غم، ماشاءاللہ ماشاءاللہ. آ جاتی ہے سہرا بھی زینب بھی زیاد کو، آ جاتی ہے سہرا بھی زینب بھی زیاد کو، جب आज मुहर्रम को उठता है अलम तेरा, दिल सीने में जब तक है भूलेगा आ देख मेरे गाजी, आ देख ऊंचा है अलम तेरा, ताबूत जब उठता है शबीर का गाजी, ताबूत जब उठता है शबीर का गाजी, ताबूत के आगे भी चलता है अलम तेरा, दिल सीने में जब तक है भूलेगा न गम तेरा, ऊंचा है अलम तेरा, आ देख मेरे ऊंचा है अलम तेरा, वो कौन से सदमे थे टूट गए जिससे, वो कौन से सदमे थे टूट गए जिससे, एक दर्द था ज़ैनब का और दूसरा गम तेरा, दिल सीने में जब तक है भूलेगा न गम तेरा, ऊंचा है अलम तेरा, الفضل بابا علمدار مشکلم، الفضل بابا علمدار مشکلم، مه هاشمی نصر امیر دلارم، مه هاشمی نصر امیر دلارم، معنی سعادتی و حالی هدایتی و بهترین شهادتی و کشته ولایتی و لایق سیادتی، ابوالفضل بابا علمدار لشکرم، ابوالفضل بابا علمدار لشکرم، مه هاشمی نصر امیر هاشمی نصر شاه باوقاری و شهید کربلایی و شاه بزم مایی و شمع خدا نمایی، شورش سینه هایی و ابوالفضل بابا علمدار لشکرم، ابوالفضل بابا علمدار من هاشمی نصر امیر دلارم، من هاشمی نصر امیر دلارم، چشم دلگشایی و چشم نینمایی و جام شنایی و چهره دلربایی و چاره درد مایی و ابوالفضل بابا علمدار لشکرم، ابوالفضل بابا مه هاشمی نصر امیر دلارم، مه هاشمی نصر امیر دلارم، برگ شمشیری و بنده بی‌نظیری و به عاشقان امیری و برادران فقیری و غیرت این مسیری و شور آسمانی و شاب بیکرانی و شعر ستارگانی و شراب عاشقانی و ابوالفضل بابا علمدار لشکرم، ابوالفضل بابا مه هاشمی نصر امیر دلارم، مه هاشمی نصر امیر نور خیمگاهی و یک نفر سپاهی و به خواهر پناهی و سلامت نگاهی و به عشق نگاهی و ابوالفضل بابا علمدار این امیدی و بمزه من شهیدی و شیر دل رشیدی و بندری کلیدی و غیر خدا ندیدی و اول فضل بابا فولم دار لشکنم اول فضل بابا فولم مه هاشمی نسب امیر دلاورم مه هاش مظلوم شهید عطشان مولا بیکس تنها یا عبدالله یا عبدالله حيدر أمير المؤمنين 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 توجه ابن الحسن الجلال ظهوره سقای دشت کربلا ابوالفضل دستش شده نیستم جدا ابوالفضل از شهدای کربلا تنها شهیدی که ودا نکرد خداحافظی نکرد با اهل خیام ابوالفضل وقتی عباس رفت آب بیارانه همه مطمئن بودن عمو برمیگرده آی اما ناله رسید از القمه اخا ادرک اخا ابی عبدالله رفت القمه ناله زد الان انکسر قلبی آی همه بچه ها دم خیمه منتظر امو با آب برمیگردم آی اما دیدم بابا با کمر خم داره من میگرده با آستین اشکاشو پاک کرد آی بابا اومد ابی الله اول کار کرد من پیش زینب کبرا فرمود زینب جان لباس اسیری بتر کنی آی بدرم عمود خیمه امو رو کشید آی شب باب الهوای ابوالفضل العباس. Brothers and sisters, throughout the year, this is the only night, special night that we recite for Abu'l-Fazl Abbas, Bab al-Hawaii. Please raise your hands, remember all your hajat. Ya Kashif al-Kab, al-Majd al-Hussein, اكشف كربي بعد أخيك الرسال يا غفني يا أبا صالح يا غمر بني هاشم غفني يا غمر بني هاشم غفني. In Tehran, there is a famous neighborhood that Christians, they have programs tonight for Abu'l-Fazl Abbas. They're Christians, but they come and gather together and they shed tears for Abu'l-Fazl Abbas. Ya Abu'l-Fazl. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alayka ya Abu Abdullah. وعلى الأرواح التي هلت الفناء عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله خلق مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين وعلى أخ الحسين بالفضل العباس. اسمك العظيم الأعظم بباب الهوائج بالفضل العباس. يا الله 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 يا رحمن يا رحيم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك وعلى محبة الحسين في الدنيا والآخرة واكفنا يا باقي الرجاء يا كافي المهمات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك غافر الذنب الخفيات إنك على كل شيء قدير أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء ما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء ما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. For all marhumin and marhumat, على الخصوص brother Razak Amin Muhammad رحم الله من يقرأ الفاتحة مع الصلوات. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا